Continuing my portrait drawing demonstration, here is part 2 with the shading process. Watch part 1 if you want to see how I ended up with this construction sketch, and for this video I'll do my best to show you as much as I can of my shading techniques. I'll explain exactly what pencil grades and tools I'm using, and I just want to mention I put all my materials in the description below. So now let's go ahead and bring the sketch to life. Alright, before I start the shading, I sharpen all my pencils with a knife and sandpaper. So I have all that prepared. I'm actually going to start this specific portrait not with pencil, but I'm going to fill in the white highlights on her left side first with some white Conté, which is basically just like white charcoal, but less dusty. It doesn't really matter to me. If I didn't have one, I would use the other. So you can just use white charcoal instead. It's really not a big deal. I just like to use this instead of the white charcoal sometimes because it can be a little bit softer, but that's also preference. Okay, I'm going to start on her forehead. And I'm going to start with the white highlights in this case. Usually I like to add the white highlights in the end, but in this specific case, her highlights are affect a large area of her face. And if I wanted to use the white highlights as the last step, I would have trouble because it doesn't really work that well using white charcoal or this Conté on top of layers of graphite. And I heard a lot of people are saying that they cannot do any highlights in the end because they're trying to put this on top of the graphite, but in some cases it can actually be better to use this first, which is what I'm going to do right now. I'm just trying to gently bring out these highlights. I have to say, this step isn't always just a technical thing to do in the first place, but also mentally and psychologically. Because for some portraits, I don't know, it can help if you start with the fun and satisfying part and that just makes you want to continue or makes you want to, work it out better. That's just what I think. And none of these portraits are the same exact process from start to finish. I like to switch things up, and sometimes I also just feel like, hey, I just want to start with the highlight and then build up the values after that. I feel like this glabella and nasal body highlight is very important, and it kind of fades out on top. And I think what's kind of cool about this highlight right here is that it kind of dissolves the nasal body edge and makes everything blend into each other. And if some of the areas are a little too bright, it's not really that big of a deal because I can put graphite on top of this. Not the other way around though. Okay, and I don't know if you're wondering, but in this step I don't like to put in the spot highlights on the nose and the eyes because these are areas as a whole I need to work out and I need to shade and bring out its 3D structure. So when I'm done with the shading, I just like to go in and erase those spot highlights, and then I can go in with the white charcoal or Conté. But for now, I think it's more helpful to focus on these areas as a whole with the shading and not spare these spot highlights. All right, I feel like these were the most important parts. I'm kind of debating to use this white also for the hair. I know these areas of the hair are not as bright as on the skin, but yeah, I'm not going to do it. Okay, I changed my mind. Okay, I really try to restrain myself with whenever I use this. I don't want to overdo it, but now you can already see the 3D form better. Okay, I forgot her upper eyelid. Okay, now that I have this, I'm going to grab a blending stump and I'm going to make this really smooth. Right now you can see a lot of texture in there and I want to smoothen it out. So I'm just going in, not too much pressure, and blend this out. All right, now that it's all blended, I actually want to reinforce the brightest parts again. Because when you use these paper stumps, I feel like it also dulls the white a little bit. And before I'm moving on to the pencils, I really want to make sure the white is blended nice into the paper tone, because if I'm going to do that later and trying to blend that into the next tone, it's going to fuse and smudge with the graphite. So I'm trying to keep the white as pure as possible right now. Like this area here is really strong. Okay, and I'm going to use my paper stump again. And I'm a little bit careful not to touch the outlines too much, because then it will drag some of the graphite into the white. I want to keep it as clean as possible. Okay, I feel like I'm happy with the white highlight. And now I'm going to start the actual shading process. I'm going to start with the same pencil grade I used for the sketch, which is H. Because although they're both the same grade, I feel like this is still softer. Maybe it's just because it's a different company, or I don't know, they use different material, but this is definitely a little bit softer than this H. So I don't want to go too dark right from the beginning, so start with H. I'm just going to block in a few of the values. Very light pressure. Actually, extremely light pressure. I try to be as gentle as possible, although if I'm completely honest, I have to say sometimes I do also lose my patience and then I'm a little bit faster and rougher. But I think the softer you are to the paper, the more it will reward you in the end. And also, have to keep in mind when you use the paper stumps, it will darken the tone. So I'm going to blend with these later, and I know it's going to darken the whole value. To me, the hair is always the most tedious part, because it's just such a large area and it's most of the time very dark, so you just have to fill in this huge area. I'm trying to apply the same amount of pressure and be very gentle. I'm looking at her lower lip right now and I'm debating to go back to using the white, because this is quite a big area, at least here on the left side. I'm just going to do it. Like, I can ignore all the other highlights on the lower lip, but This one on the left is actually quite strong and decently sized. Okay, gonna blend that a little bit. And then I can fill in the rest of the lip. And when I'm going in with the shading, I try not to lose the outlines. And once I go in with a darker grade, when I begin to lose these lines, I'm going to reinforce them. But right now with this age grade, I can still see them, so it's okay for me. I'm rotating my pencil every now and then to get the sharpest tip. And when I'm coming closer to this transition here, which I don't want there to be any edge to be seen, so usually I'm using the circular motion, but over here I'm switching to letting it fade out with lighter pressure here. Let's block in this huge dark shape here. I just wanted to say, I know the sketch didn't look like a lot, but for me personally, the proportion part and constructing the whole portrait is like 60% of all the work. And once I'm starting to fill in shadow shapes and values like I'm doing right now, you can really see how everything comes together and merges. I mean, I'm not doing anything crazy right now, I'm just filling in the shapes, but it's the work that I did before with the proportions that makes this work. And if the proportions are off by a lot, I mean, it doesn't obviously have to be a perfect copy of the reference, and most of us don't want that. But if the proportions are off in a way where the portrait looks unbelievable, then the best shading in the world won't save the portrait. But if you have a solid foundation with the proportions and your shading might not be the richest, the portrait will still look okay. So shifting my focus to learning more about proportions really helped me and elevated my portrait drawings. That and being patient with filling in the shadow shapes. Because you know, when you get impatient, you tend to scrub over big areas, and that just creates a lot of texture. I mean, every artist works different, and I've seen great artists start off by scrubbing in the whole value and then smudging everything smooth. It just really depends on your preference, but I just want to learn this way, so those are just things that help me. What's really annoying though is that basically this whole side of the hair could be filled in with graphite. Could and should, I guess. But you know what? Since I get distracted so easily and I'm a rebel, I'm gonna fill in the eyebrow first. I always like to fill in the eyeballs too. I know they look very white and bright, but I really dislike the eyeballs being super white and standing out. I know they're standing out in the reference photo, but I don't think I want them as white. Maybe I might change my mind, but I like to shade the eyeballs like actual balls, and that really makes them pop. So I might erase some of the graphite later, but for now I really like to tone them in too. And that just makes the highlight on the eye really pop in the end. Okay, it just seems like I do everything to avoid toning in this hair. So yeah, I want to continue with the cheek, okay? Okay, I guess there's no way around it. Let me just fill in the hair. Okay, I feel like this is a decent start. Yeah, maybe the nose over here could use a little bit more. I was just paying attention to this slight shadow area between her eyebrows. It just adds a lot of three-dimensionality to her face. I'm just trying to model some of the form. On a whole layer of H graphite, and this may be very light right now, but I gave myself a pretty good map of where the shadows will be and a base. And from this base I can then just darken a few areas. Okay, I think I have to take a break at this point and then I'll come back to finish the portrait. Back to the drawing, and after the H pencil grade, I'm now going in with HB. I'm just trying to slowly build my way up to the more softer pencil grades. And yeah, I mean, it's not always this straightforward, but this time I feel like I just wanna build it up with patience. So I'm just going to reinforce some of the darker shades. So this part over here is definitely darker than this part with her skin. So I'm gonna darken this area. It doesn't always seem like that, but sometimes I feel even one pencil grade softer makes a big difference. So I'm careful to jump to higher numbers of B from H. And I'm also reinforcing the outline here, because this is a very sharp, crisp edge, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to soften this edge. Just like over here, her face contour is really sharp. Well, you can't see it, and I'm cutting this out. I do sharpen the pencil in between whenever I feel like the tip gets and the sides of the tip get dull. I'm gonna try and give her pupil more definition. Yes, this very deep blue, which looks very dark to me. I feel like on the left side The pupil kind of merges with the shadow. And on her upper eyelid, as well as her lower eyelid, there's this slight double line. And I don't want to make it too strong, and now I feel like I want to, with my pencil eraser, want to lift off a little bit of graphite in between these lines. Okay, I think this forehead area in between the eyebrows could be darkened as well. I feel like this is a very dark edge here, and it kind of fades out. Okay, I see a sharp edge on this left nose wing here, but the sharp edge doesn't really come from an outline, but rather from the highlight being in such high contrast to this shadow over here. So I'm just trying to reinforce this shadow edge here. And I feel like overall this is as dark as the shadow should get. It's not a very deep dark shadow, but what this does over here for me is it gives the face a variation in the surface. This shadow right here tells you that the face is not flat and has depth. So it is quite important, but it's also important not to overdo it. So subtlety is key sometimes for me. And the nostril obviously has a very sharp edge too. Over here we have a very soft shadow, but it is darker. Really try to make everything seem as blended as possible before I use any tools. I try to think of the blending tools. I'm using blending stumps and brushes. I try to think of them more as tools to get rid of the texture if I want to, and not creating blended gradients. They can help with blended areas, but the result will look better if you already did the most work with the pencil. And I think drawing a portrait is all about the decisions you make. The decisions and the proportions, the decision to go back and correct something, or like you see me doing right now, the decisions to establish hard edges and soft edges, lost edges. Once you made a decision in your head and your mind, then you can follow that up with the technique itself. And you can see the harsher shadows, I apply a little bit more pressure to the pencil. But where I know it has to be soft, obviously I'm trying to be as gentle as possible. And I feel like sometimes using these tools, like the paper stump or brush, there are also ways to finish a portrait faster. So if you're really impatient or you don't have that much time and you just want to do a quick study, I feel like you can be a little bit more aggressive with these tools and, work them into the paper to create darker values faster. But for some reason, with this portrait, I'm able to be kind of patient. And the advantage of being very gentle to the paper is also that you can easier lift graphite off the paper. I feel like a beginner mistake for me was to think I have to go darker, so I have to press harder and be more aggressive. And I just grabbed my H pencil again because I felt like I needed to fill in some more of a transition value over here. So now is a good example. I feel like right here, there needs to be some graphite lifted. And I'm going to use my kneaded eraser. And I'm just forming a tip. And then I'm just lightly dabbing. Working on this shadow over here, I know some people might think, as I already saw in one comment, that it's really hard to see these shapes I'm showing sometimes. So let me show you what I see right here at this inner eye corner. There's this very dark shadow, just round, and then you have this part of the inner eye corner. I feel like I made this edge a little bit too sharp, so I'm just gonna take away some of that edge. I just started using a pencil extender because this pencil got a little bit too tiny and I don't want to hold it here. I want to hold it further back. This inner eye corner is very dark. But it's just the very tip though, not the whole thing. Then there's this part of the tear duct where this pinkish tone kind of blends in with the rest of the eye. Upper eyelid, we have the skin folding in. So this value over here is definitely darker. And right at the crease, the skin fold, we have more shading going on. Whenever I feel like I need the tone in between the HB and the paper color, I'm grabbing the H one again. And that just makes the transition softer as well. And on her forehead, we have another very harsh edge. Now for this very soft shadow on her cheekbone, I'm using my H again. I'm just going over with the same pencil grade because I really want to move forward carefully. And I'm using very quick but gentle strokes right next to each other. So I'm just trying to tone this whole area. With a smooth transition. And once I feel confident to go in with a darker shade, I'm trying to bring out this dark shadow in here without creating harsh edges. So basically you want to stay in this tone you created. And then whenever I feel like I need to fill in lighter parts, I'm gonna go back to the H. And I feel like that's fine for now until I have overall darker values. Then I might darken this again, but right now the contrast is fine. I think key to this soft blended look is to really be patient and filling in all these gaps, tiny gaps in between, with whatever pencil grade you need at the moment. I switch back and forth all the time. See this very tiny detail on this eye, where the white of the eyeball is kind of taking over this iris. Reinforcing the mouth line. The mouth line is most of the times something you can always go very hard on. The corners of the mouth oftentimes have this faded out shadow towards the cheek. It's just these little shadow gradients which add to the three-dimensionality of the face. When shading the lips, I always like to keep in mind to create depth from the mouth line towards the outside, which make the lips look 3D. And the upper lip is most of the times darker than the lower lip. I see this slight edge in here. We have a lot of highlights in the lower lip, and I think I'm just going to ignore them. I'm going to tone in the lip, and then later or soon I am going to erase these spots. They have a relative hard edge, so I'm going to erase these spots and then go back in with a pencil in between. So right now I just want to create a slight gradient. And now we have this shadow underneath her lower lip. A very hard edge right here. Then it's fading out towards the outside. And if you pay real close attention, you can see that where the shadow touches the lip, the edge becomes really hard. But on the other side, on the chin, it's softer. So these are the kinds of subtleties I try to pay attention to and catch. Whenever I want to soften an edge a little bit more, I take a harder pencil grade and draw over the transition. Alright, now for the highlights on the lip, I'm just taking my pencil eraser and drawing in these rectangular shapes. And now I'm going over that again with an H. And this area right here is always a bit brighter. Now that I erased some of that graphite on the lips, I can actually go back in again with my Conte. And you can see that this really added to the structure of the lips. I think at this point I want to draw this spot highlight on the nose too. And again, you can just see this is all a play of soft and hard edges. This harsh spot highlight works because it is such a contrast to this softer edge over here. And I just know when I was more of a beginner, everything in the portrait would have either hard edges or soft edges, or too much of one or the other. And I think a good portrait makes a nice harmony of soft and harsh edges. Okay, remember earlier when I said I don't know if I wanna draw her eyeballs white like in the reference? I think I wanna try it and I'll see if I like it or not. So I'm just trying to mix in a tiny bit of this Conte with the graphite to make it cooler. Let's see how this looks. I'm really super gentle right now. Yeah, I feel a little bit works actually. I don't want to make it a white. As for the eyebrows, I am not sure right now how much darker I'm going to go with this portrait. I think I would at least try to put one darker grade on top of this to see how that works. But I like to keep them very rough until I'm drawing in darker individual hair strands. And that works better for me than just going right in sharp and drawing the eyebrow. I like to keep this general shape and then I become very specific closer towards the end. Okay, I think it's time to tackle this big shadow underneath her chin. Again, I see a very harsh edge, but it's not so much coming from a dark line, but more from this reflected light. So I'm going to draw this with my pencil eraser. And then it kind of stops over here. Okay, let's see how this works once I filled in this big shadow. And more of the transition value. Okay, before I tackle this side of the head and darken this, because I'm kind of resting my hand on this side, so I don't want to smudge this whole area. I want to try to go darker on this side. So I'm gonna grab, what should I grab? Should I grab B or 2B? I'm gonna try 2B, and if this is too grainy, I'm gonna go back to B. So let's see. I think it works. Paying attention to keeping this sharp edge. I'm gonna grab a 4B right now. Try to go even darker. I have to say this is the first time I'm really tempted to not use a paper stump at all, but at the same time I'm super curious how blending this texture will look on this. Maybe I'll test it on a smaller area. Okay, I want to darken this cheekbone shadow. I'm using the B right now over HB. Okay, I feel like this is enough. And I'm so curious about the blending stumps. I just have to try and smudge some of the texture right now. I think it looks fine how it is. Usually I use these tools though, so... And I do have quite a lot of texture right here and in these big areas. Okay, I feel like it didn't really ruin anything. So I'm just gonna try and continue with this. I feel like it worked pretty well. And 6B will be my limit for this drawing. I'm trying to bring out the absolute darkest spots. I'm working out some details in the hair, but I try to keep it pretty minimal. Just a few hair clumps. I'm going to bring out some highlights in the hair with the pencil eraser. And since we're adding details to the hair, I'm going to draw in the eyebrows. I'm going to use H. And not trying to overdo it, and tracing some lighter strands. Now, let's do the most fun part, the spot highlight in the eye. I'm going to use an electric eraser for this, and to have a really sharp pointy tip, I am rubbing this against sandpaper so I can really erase out this sharp highlight. And to make this really pop, I'm going to use the white Conte. To finish the eyes, I'm gonna need some lashes. Try not to get carried away by adding too many. And that's it. Now I'm going to finish the portrait by filling in this side of the hair. Although I really like this unfinished look on this side, I think I just want to darken a little bit of this hair and then maybe let it fade out, because I think there's right now a little bit too big of an area unfinished. So I'm just going to go ahead and with an HB darken at least this part here. Okay, I'm going to blend the graphite a little bit with my makeup brush. And to finish the hair, I'm going to put in some hair strands with the H. Okay, and I feel like now I'm ready to say it's finished. I hope you could take away a few useful tricks for yourself from this, and thank you so much for watching my process on this portrait study, and I'll see you next time.